Hello and welcome to the 10th lesson of this Excel course. I am Sumit Bansal, and in this video we will learn about logical formulas in Excel and how to use these. Let's get started by understanding the AND formula in Excel. Let me show you how the AND function works. So I type AND in Excel. Now AND takes logical arguments and it analyzes these logical arguments, and if these are all true then AND returns true, and if any of these arguments is a false then AND returns false. So in this case, if I type true and hit enter, AND would return true because both the arguments are true. But if I type and I type a true here and a false here, then AND returns a false, because to this be true all the arguments should be true. Instead of typing, I can have the trues and falses in cells and I can give their reference. So here I can give the reference of A2 and A3, and it analyzes both these arguments, and since one of them is false, AND returns a false. You can have inbuilt conditions within AND formula. So here if I analyze, if 3 is greater than 1 and 3 is equal to 3, AND would analyze both these conditions. Let me show you what this returns. So I select this part and I press F9, and you can see it returns a true here. Since I don't want to hard code this into the formula, I press Ctrl Z. Similarly, if I analyze this, I know this will be true because 3 is equal to 3, so I press Ctrl Z to come back. Since both of these arguments are true, AND returns a true here. Also, if a true is within double quotes, Excel considers it as true, and same is the case with false as well. So even this is in a double quote and considers this as a logical argument, a logical value, true or false, and hence it returns a true. One very important thing to note here is that any value that is positive and an integer value would be considered a true by the AND function. So if you type anything 1, 2 or 3, then AND would consider it as true. So if I type 3 here and 2 here, since both of these are considered true by AND, it would return a true here. And to show you how this works when I have a 0, if I type a 0 here and a 2 here, this returns a false. The reason is that AND considers 0 as false. You can test these conditions by simply using one single argument. You can see AND returns a false with 0, but it returns a true with 1. It would return a true with 2. What happens if you give decimals? If you give 1.5, it returns a true because this is a positive number. If you give 0.5, it still returns a true. So anything which is greater than 0 returns a true. OR function takes logical arguments and it returns true if any one of the argument is true, and false if all of the arguments are false. So let me show you how this works. I type OR and I hit tab to autocomplete the function. You can see it takes logical arguments. It can take up to 255 logical arguments, and it analyzes all of these, and if all of them are false then it returns false, but if any of these logical arguments is true then OR returns true. So here I manually type true and false. Now you can see this returns true because one of the arguments, the first one, is true. I can also use cell references. So I type or I hit tab and I can use these cell references. I can use them either one by one. So I can have A2 comma A3, and then I can analyze this and it returns true because one of them is true, or I can use a continuous range. So I can select both of these like this and I can see that it still returns a true. As I said, it would return a false if both of the conditions are false. So if I type false and false again, oops, it will return a false. You can also use logical arguments in terms of conditions. So you can provide conditions, Excel would analyze those conditions, and if it returns true, then OR would return true. But if all of those conditions return false, then this would return false. So to show you this, let me put in a condition, a logical condition, which is 3 is greater than 1, which is obviously true, and 3 is less than 3, which is false. But since one of them is true, it returns true. I can use these arguments true and false within double quotes, and Excel would know that I mean to use true and false even though they are in double quotes. And as I hit enter, this returns true because one of them is true. Also, you can use numbers, but in case of OR, since it's analyzing logical arguments, any positive number which is greater than 0 obviously is considered true, and 0 is considered false. So in this case, if I take 3 and 2, both of these numbers are considered true because these are greater than 0, and when I hit enter, it gives me a true. Let me show you what happens if I only use 0. Oops. I type 0, comma 0, and you can see that when I hit enter, it returns false because 0 is considered false by OR. Not function takes one single argument. So if I type not here, hit tab to autocomplete the function, you can see it takes one single argument, which is a logical argument. So it should always return either a true or a false. So let me show you how this works. If you simply type true within not function, it will give you a false because it has converted true to false. Instead, if you write false instead of true, it will give you true. So it just reverses the logical value. So instead of using true or false, you can also evaluate conditions within true. So for example, let me use a cell reference. Let me use A2, which has the value 20 in it, and I say 20 is greater than 10. Now this is true because 20 is greater than 10. If you hit F9, you can see that this returns true. I would hit Control Z to go back, and since I'm using not function, it would convert this true into false. So you can see that it takes either a logical argument or a condition that returns a logical argument. You can also use numbers, but it would also be treated like logical values. So as I have mentioned earlier in my videos, that any number greater than 0 is considered true, and any number which is 0 would be considered false. So in this case, if I type 1, which is considered true, not would return a false. So if I hit enter, you can see not returns false. But here, if I use 0, which is a false, then not will convert this into true. Now you can try this with decimal numbers as well. If I type 0.1, this logical argument converts into true, and since I'm using it within not, it will convert this into false. True function does not take any argument, and as the name makes it clear, it returns true. So to use this function, you can just type true and parenthesis without any argument within it, and you hit enter, and as soon as you do that, it returns a true. Even better, you need not even type the parenthesis. As soon as you type true and you hit enter, it would still return true. False function, as the name suggests, returns false. It does not take any argument, so I type false, I hit tab to autocomplete the function, and I can have parenthesis, but it does not take any argument, and I hit enter. This returns the false argument. I also do not need to type the parenthesis. I can just write false and hit enter, and it would work the same way. If formula takes 3 arguments, so let me show you how this works. I type if and I hit tab to autocomplete the function. You can see it takes three arguments. First is a logical test where if analyzes a condition which returns either a true or a false. When it returns a true, you can specify a value that the formula should return. And if it returns a false, then again you can specify a value that it should return. So now let me show you how this works. I go and I select A2 and I say if this is greater than 10, which is a condition that would return a true or a false. And if this returns true, then give me right, else the formula should return wrong. And I hit enter, and you can see this returns right because this condition A2 is greater than 10 is true. A2 is 20 and 20 is greater than 10. What happens if I change this value? If I put 5 here, it returns wrong because now this condition is false, and hence it returns the value for false. Now you can use if condition again within a formula. So you can use nested if, where say you want to identify if this value is greater than 10, then it returns right. And in case of false, you can again use an if condition. If this value is less than 0, and here return okay, else return wrong, and I hit enter. And you can see it returns wrong because it first checks this condition, is A2 greater than 10? It is not because A2 is 5. Then it checks if A2 is less than 0. It is not because this is 5, which is greater than 0. So it comes here and it returns wrong. So you can see I have used two if conditions within a single formula. In if, you can use 64 if conditions within one if formula. So if your number of conditions exceed 64, then it would return an error. So let me show you how this formula works. Again, I type -1 here, and it returns okay because it checks this condition, this is false, it comes here and it checks this condition which comes out to be true, and hence it returns okay. So this is how this formula works. Now let me show you what happens when you omit one of the conditions. So if I type if A2 is greater than 10, then I have to specify a value if the condition is true, but I do not specify anything. I just press again comma, and then I specify the value for false condition, and I hit enter. Oops. I hit enter, and this returns wrong because as of now -1, it analyzes this condition and it sees -1 is not greater than 10, so it goes to the wrong. But what if this is actually greater than 10? So I put 20 here, and you can see it returns 0. So whenever you omit a condition for true, this would return 0. Now what if you do not have this comma, what you just have one condition? Let me show you how it works. So I type if A2 is less than 10, then give me right, and I hit enter. You can see that this condition is false, so this is not a true condition, and it checks for the values for false. So it analyzes its condition, it sees this is false, but it only has the value for right. It does not have the value if false, and hence it returns false. But what if you don't want to return a false? You want it to return a 0 like the previous formula. So you can just copy this formula here, and instead of leaving it blank, just put a comma here and hit enter, and it will return a 0. So Excel reads this, it analyzes this condition, it goes here and sees that there is a condition for true, and in condition of false I have left it blank, and so it takes that blank, converts it to in 0 and returns it. But if I do not type this comma here, it would return false. Here I have some numbers in cell A2 to A4. Now let me show you how IFERROR function works. So I type if error, and I hit tab to autocomplete the function. If error function takes two arguments. First is the value that you want to analyze, and another one is what you want to do if this value is an error. So let's see how this works. I use a2 and I divide it by a3, and I want Excel to check this condition. If this is an error, then this should say error in the cell, and I hit enter. Now you can see that it returns 10, which is this value, because this value is not an error, and hence it does not have to go to this second argument. But what if the first value is an error? So let me show you how it works. I select a3 and I divide it by 0. Now if I divide any number by 0, I know this would be an error, and I know this a3 by a4 is an error, and in this case I again give the condition as error, and I hit enter, and you can see it displays error because this is what I asked it to do. I told Excel that if this value comes out to be an error, then just display error in the cell, and hence it does that. Now what if I do not tell it what to do if there is an error? So I use this condition, and I again take a3 divided by a4, which is 10 by 0, but I do not specify any condition. I leave it blank, and I hit enter. You can see that it will not accept it. It says that there should be something mentioned. But what if I just use a comma and I hit enter? It returns a 0. So this argument, the second argument, is mandatory, but you can leave it out, and if you leave it out, then it would automatically return a 0. Now a very important thing to note about IFERROR is that this works only in Excel versions 2007 and above. It will not work in 95 or 97. So if in case you have these versions, earlier versions, you can use ISERROR and combine it with if. So let me show you how I would use it in this case without an if error. So I would use if, and I would first analyze this condition, and I would say is error. Is error is a formula that returns true if the value is an error and false if the value is not an error, and I say this divided by this. Analyze this. If this is true, which means that if this is an error, then give me the text error displayed, but if this is not an error, then just give me these value, which is a3 divided by a4, and I hit enter. And you can see this displays error because this is an error. But what if I just change this value to 2 and I hit enter? This returns 5 because now it goes and checks this condition and moves to this value. So this is how you can use the functionality of IFERROR if you're working in Excel versions less than 2007. Is family of formulas is very simple yet really powerful set of formulas to check for conditions, and as the name suggests, it will check and return either a true or a false. So let me show you how it works. The first formula in this category is blank, and as the name suggests, this would check for a blank cell. In this case I give a2 as the cell. You can see it takes only one argument, which could either be a value or a cell reference, and I close the bracket and I hit Control Enter, and this gives true because a2 is blank. If I type something here, if I type my name, then this returns false because now this cell is not blank. The next one is error. This checks for an error in the cell, and if there is any error, be it division error, not available error, name error, reference error, this would return true, and if there is no error, then it would return false. So now when I hit Control Enter, this gives true because there is a division error here. This is a very important formula if you are handling errors and you do not have 2007 or 10 or 2013. So in versions prior to 2007 there was no if error formula, and then is error became very important because this can be used to handle errors. A slight variation of is error formula is NA formula, and this would only check for the not available error, nothing else. So in this case, let me select A4, I close the bracket and I hit Control Enter, and this returns true because there is a not available error here. But if I copy the division error and paste it in cell A4, then this returns false because this is not the error we are checking for. We are checking for an NA error and this is a division error. So if there is an NA, it returns true, else false. Next in line is number, and as the name makes it very clear, this checks for numbers. So here I select A5, I close the bracket and I hit Control Enter, and it returns true because this is a number. If this is not a number, then this would return false. Variations of is number is odd and is even. Is odd, as the name suggests, returns true when the number is odd, as in this case A6 has 1, which is an odd number, so this returns true. If there is an even number, as in case of A5, then this returns true, else this returns false. If I put in A6 here, then this returns false because this is not an even number. What happens if I put a text here? Let's see, I type hello, and both these functions returns a value error. So in is odd or is even or is number formula, it's important that the value or the cell reference you are keying in here is a number. If it is not, then this would return an error. And the last in line is text formula. It'll check whether your cell has text or not, and if it has text, then this would return true, else this would return false. In this case, I'm selecting A7, which looks empty, and I hit Control Enter, and this returns false because there is no text in this. Let me type some text into it. I type hello, and as soon as I type hello, this returns true. Now let me also show you something very interesting. I will type equal to double quotes, which means I'm telling the cell you should contain nothing, but I'm still mentioning it using equal to double quotes, empty double quotes, and I hit enter. Now this cell has nothing, but this still shows true. And now if I delete this, this shows false. The reason is that even if you type equal to double quotes, Excel consider this cell as text, and it happens with me a lot of times that I import some data or I download data from some of the databases, and it gives me blank rows, but those are not blank that have that equal to double quotes. So this formula is text formula is really helpful in checking for those cells, and then you can manually treat those by deleting these values. So this is how is family of formulas work in Excel. I hope you found this useful. Thank you and have a nice day.